Here we go. So we've been going through, Jesus has just begun his public ministry. He has just begun speaking and preaching. And he talked about the blessings. We saw that in the beginning of chapter 5. The things that cause us to be blessed. Blessed, and it's the things that we wouldn't expect. Blessed are the poor in spirit. Blessed are the meek. Blessed are the merciful. Blessed are those who, it seems, hold back. Those who don't push themselves forward, but truly just take steps back and it's just, you wouldn't. And blessed is speaking of happiness. We talked about that. We talked about how we are called to be the salt of the earth and the light of the world. I'm not going to rehash all of that kind of stuff because you can just go back and listen to what we did on Friday and Saturday. We talked about how Jesus did not come to take away the law. Jesus did not come to make the Old Testament scriptures something that we just say, oh, these things don't matter anymore. We are New Testament Christians, so the Old Testament scriptures don't matter anymore. That's not what Jesus came for. He didn't come to, he says, abolish the law. He came to fulfill the law. That's key. Then he told us that if we want to be righteous, we have to exceed the righteousness of the most righteous and religious people of his day. That's what he said. He said in verse 20, right before we get into where we're at, he said, "For I tell you, unless your righteousness exceeds that of the scribes and Pharisees, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven." So hey, Mike Stromberger, I love the fact that I'm seeing you on here, man. I wish I could have coffee with you. It's been so long since we've spent any time together. But Jesus, he's telling us we've got to be more righteous than the scribes and the Pharisees. These guys were the most righteous people in his day, or they appeared that way from the outside. These guys kept the law better than most. Better, and they made it their aim. They went to extremes to make sure that they were not breaking the laws of God. Now, as we speak of the laws of God, there are two that we're going to look at today. And there would be some who would believe, maybe even today, there are some who would say, okay, regarding murder, you shouldn't do it. There's probably judgment for murder, right? I mean, you hear about cold-blooded murder. You hear about these crazy guys in our history, like Adolf Hitler. We look at these guys and we say, these guys were killers. These guys were evil. We've got some stories in our own news in the last couple of months, right, where these guys are evil killers, and we say there's got to be some kind of judgment for them. And the law would agree with you. The law would say, yes, there is a judgment for the one who is killed. And so Jesus says, or he takes this and he picks it up where we already agree with it, where we would say, don't kill anybody. Don't murder anybody. Now, there might be some discussion on capital punishment and the right time to kill somebody. There's some discussion on that. That's not what we're talking about here. We're specifically talking about murder, and that you ought not to murder. That the one who kills is going to be judged. But Jesus, in verse 21 of chapter 5 of Matthew, says, "You've heard it said to those of old." This is speaking of Scripture. This is speaking of the Old Testament. "You shall not murder, and whoever murders will be liable to judgment. But I say to you that everyone who is angry with his brother will be liable to judgment. Whoever insults his brother will be liable to the council, and whoever says, 'You fool,' will be liable to the hell of fire." So Jesus just took this to a whole new place. Jesus went from, you've heard it said, you shouldn't murder. You've heard it said that Hitler was a bad guy. You've heard it said that that guy that you read about in the news was evil and that he's going to have judgment. And then Jesus says, but I want to tell you something, the one who's angry, the anger towards your brother, the hatred that you feel towards somebody is murder. is equal, is on the same plane, is murder in your heart, and that you'll be liable to the same judgment. We love to put ourselves as the standard. We love to say, my bad is here, but there's a bad out there that's here, and that bad needs to get judgment massively. But as long as you're where I'm at or under, we're good to go. We're going to receive more mercy than judgment because I'm the standard. Not the evil in the world, not the it's we hate the idea that there's no consequence for the evil man in the world. We think of sometimes I hesitate getting into the specifics, but we think of this whole situation in Las Vegas and whatever happened there in reality. But we think of this whole situation, and we see this guy shooting into a crowd, somebody shooting into a crowd, and people dying as a result. And we just hate the idea that there's not some kind of a judgment, some kind of a justice, some kind of God is going to deal with this rightly. And we want to believe that. We want to believe that hey, as life passes on, there's got to be some kind of a judgment. And yet, when it comes to us, we want mercy. We want grace for ourselves. And we want to say, you know what, when this whole thing is over for me, I sure hope there's mercy and grace, and I believe that there is. And Jesus is elevating this and saying not only the one who kills, not only the one who murders, but the one who's angry, the one who hates will be liable to judgment. The one who says, you fool. Man, have you ever said that? Have you ever done that? Have you ever pointed at that guy's such an idiot. That guy's so stupid. I can't stand that guy. I can't stand that girl. I can't stand being around them. Man, I wish I never had to see them again. I've been there. I don't know if you've ever been there. When you live in that, when you experience that, when you don't have that love, but instead you have a hate for that person, Jesus is saying you'll be liable to judgment. He even, in this verse, says you'll be liable to the hell of fire. And then he says, now stay with me, because there's a twist to this in the end. So don't just check out and say, you know what, I'm tired of this stuff. Adam, did you find me? He found me. He said he sent me a message. Adam's been trying to get on with me, so here we go. So if you're offering your gift at the altar and there remember that your brother has something against you, leave your gift there before the altar and go first be reconciled to your brother and then come and offer your gift. There are times when you're in that place where you're seeking God and you're saying, Lord, I want to know, I want to follow you, I want to be led by you the way that I ought to be led by you. And you're in that place of worship. Maybe you go to church and you're spending that time with the Lord, and it's in that moment that God reveals to you. It's in that moment of praise. It's in that moment of the sanctuary that God reveals to you. Deal with this issue. Deal with this issue between you and this person. And he says, at that point, leave your gift at the altar. So much of our gift at the altar, we can come in. There's a couple ways that we can look at in our modern setting of what the gift at the altar is. The gift at the altar could be just coming and worshiping God and knowing that as we're praising God, as we're worshiping God, as we're singing to God, as we're praying to God, that there's a hindrance between me and God. And in that moment, that hindrance could be a relationship that I have with another person. And in that moment, Jesus here is saying, when God reveals in that moment that you have a hindrance between him and you, and that hindrance is a relationship, he says, go deal with the relationship right then. Just deal with it. Get on the phone, make a trip to a house. The other idea of bringing your gift to the altar is, Lord, I want to give to you, even I want to give to you of what I have been blessed with. So we come with this mindset of, in many of us, we feel this gratefulness, and it's just like, well, I'm going to give maybe financially a gift, and I'm going to put an offering in the plate. And God's like, your offering means nothing because your relationship over here needs to be dealt with. There's a hindrance between you and God, and so often it has to do with a relationship with someone else. Remember when we looked at the beginning of chapter 5, and he said, blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy. There is an inseparable connection between the way we interact with people and the way that God interacts with us. That is all throughout the teachings of Jesus. That is all throughout the New Testament. It is a connection that the way that we interact with people is the same way God interacts with us. And so as God shows us mercy, we are expected to show that mercy outside as well. We are expected to be good to others. As God fixes a relationship with me, I'm expected to fix a relationship with a friend, a brother, a sister, somebody that I work with, somebody I go to school with. I'm expected not to hold that grudge. I'm expected to be as Jesus would be. Good morning, Lauren. I love the fact that these names come up. I'm expected to be the one who reconciles these relationships. So he says, first be reconciled to your brother. And then verse 25, come to terms quickly with your accuser while you're going with him to court, lest your accuser hand you over to the judge and the judge to the guard and you be put into prison. Truly I say, you will never get out unless you have paid the last penny. Okay? So as we have these relationships, it's God, the Bible tells us, live as much as depends on you, live at peace with all men. The Bible teaches us as much as depends on us that we're to live at peace with all men. As our accuser, as somebody who has something against us, he's saying, deal with it before it gets to the end, before you get to court, now this is in a legal sense, but we're talking in the spiritual realm, in a spiritual level. Deal with your adversary, deal with that person who has something against you. Last night we're driving home. We had like a 20-minute drive to get from point A to point B, and I got 3 kids in the back seat, and 2 of them start fighting within 2 minutes of being in the car. If you're a parent, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And they're in the back of the car. And we're just hearing kind of bumping and pushing and grunting and all this stuff. And so I made the statement to them. I said, and I don't like to threaten as a parent. I do at times. I've done that. But I don't like to threaten. I don't like to tell them what the consequence is going to be if they keep acting the way that they're acting. I don't like to do that. I like consequence. I like if you're behaving in a way that you ought not to be behaving, then you're going to have a consequence with, I don't want to have to be the parent that's just like threatening 50 times in a row. Because you know how it is. We don't ever like to discipline our kids. We don't ever like there to be consequence, but consequence is the only thing that is real. It's the only, it's just like, if I'm a count to 3 type of parent, what you realize is the kid picks up pretty quick. Like I got 3 very long seconds to get away with whatever it is that I'm doing currently. So it's like 1, and then they keep going. 2, and we never stop at 1. It never stops at 1. They just keep going because there's no consequence in that moment. That's just a side rant. But here's the thing. So they're in the back of the car, and you hear all this stuff, and I just tell them, hey guys, if you can't figure it out, there will be consequences. That's it. I'm not going to tell you what it is because it may not be something that's so bad that you'll stop. It may be something worse that you would. But all I'm saying is same as I think what we're reading right here. Deal with it along the way. Deal with it along the way. Figure it out between you and that person. Figure it out. Give of yourself as much as you need to give of yourself. Like, think of somebody else's need. Think of somebody else's comfort. Think of not only yourself. Put yourself in the other person's shoes just for a minute and just step back, because it's going to be, here's the thing. Every time there's consequences for the actions when my kids are acting up or when I'm acting up. Every time the consequence is always like if we had just sucked it up and we took the pain in the moment on the 20-minute car ride from point A to point B, that it might have been uncomfortable, it might have been difficult, but here's the thing, that consequence is still easier to take than the consequence that comes when they actually get in trouble. That's exactly what's happening here. Listen, we have this we're walking through this life where we're interacting with God and He's leading us and taking us places. And there's people that just drive us nuts. There's people that we like, you know what, Lord, I don't like this person. Maybe I hate this person. And Jesus is saying the same thing. Figure it out. Figure it out now. Because the consequence that comes later, if you don't figure it out, it's almost like, I apologize. Maybe it's Monday morning. I feel a little scattered. But I remember having this time where I was in a room and I was watching Josiah, my oldest, who's now 16, but he was a little guy. And I'm watching him interact with Sandy, my wife, and it's not going well. He's being very disrespectful, and I'm just kind of watching from a distance. And what he'll do if I'm in the room is he'll glance at me, because he knows that if I'm there, it's consequence. And he's just being disrespectful, but he keeps glancing at me. And I just keep watching it, and I'm kind of trying to give him a look of like, you better figure this out, buddy. And then there just comes a point where I barked at him, and I said, do you want me to get involved? That was my question. Do you want me to get involved? There was a couple other guys in the room in their 20s who just, like, they were just scared of me in that moment, because it was dad voice came on. I said, do you want me to get involved? And he's like, no, I don't want you to get involved. I think that that's something that's going on right here with Jesus. Figure it out. Let that relationship be restored. Give of yourself. Show love. Show mercy. But if not, there's consequence. Now, here's the thing we got to get into. Listen, look at my time, man. How did I get so far in such a short time? Here's the thing that I want to talk about. So Jesus just elevated this whole game. He said, the one who thinks that, hey, I'm not a murderer. I'm not evil. I'm not out there doing crazy stuff. I'm not making the news because I'm killing people. That's good. You're doing all right. But Jesus just elevated it, and he said, you may not be making the news because in our culture, you can hate somebody, but as long as you don't kill them, you're good to go. And Jesus says, but not in God's economy. God's economy says, no, that hatred is equal to that murder, and you're murdering them in the heart. And why is he saying this? This is the key this is the turn that I wanted to get to. Why is he saying this? Is he saying this so that we just elevate the way that we behave and we just like, oh man, now I just got to pretend I like people? Because a lot of people, that's what they've gone to, is they pretend that they say, I'm going to pretend I like people. But that's not what he's saying. That's not why he's doing it. Why he's doing it is this. He's doing it so that the ones of us that think that we're innocent will recognize that we're guilty. That's it. The message of Matthew chapter 5 is that we could all discover that we are equally guilty. That when we look at the evil in the world, we say, that's in me. I am guilty. If this is true, if the truth of my heart determines whether or not I'm a murderer, not simply whether or not I pulled a trigger, then I'm guilty. And I believe that that's what Jesus is doing here. He started right before this section. He said, you have to be more righteous than the scribes and the Pharisees. If you want to be part of the kingdom of God, you have to be more good than the scribes and the Pharisees. And then he will end this chapter, the very last verse of chapter 5 says, you must be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect. The point is, it is impossible. And then as he's talking about anger and those of us and murder, those of us who say, well, I've never murdered anybody, I've never killed anybody, so I'm good. This one doesn't apply to me. Jesus is saying this one does apply to you. The message of you shall not kill is simply you are and I am also guilty. We are guilty. That's good for us to understand that, because our righteousness is never to come from ourselves. He's saying if you're trying to be made righteous, if you think that you're going to get to God based upon your good works outweighing your bad works, which is the most common belief in our day of, just people out there is just like, if there is a heaven, are you going to make it? I mean, almost every funeral that you go to, everybody goes to heaven. That's just, hey, they're a good person. We'll see him again. And God's mercy is great, and we're hopeful for that. And I would hate to be at a funeral where they didn't say that. But here's the way that they think that takes place. They think, you get your good works and your bad works, and they're weighed out against each other. And as long as your good works outweigh your bad works, you're golden. You're good to go. And here's what Jesus is saying. If that's the standard, if the standard is your good works outweighing your bad works, you don't even realize this, but your good works will never outweigh your bad works because you didn't even know it, but you were a murderer. You've never even killed anybody, but in your heart, you're guilty of murder. And so what does that mean? It means that Jesus has to be your standard of righteousness. Jesus has to be your standard of righteousness. We come and we say, Lord, I'm guilty. It's in me. I don't love like you love. I don't care about people like you care. As a matter of fact, there's people in this world I wouldn't mind so much if I never had to see them again, if I never had to be around them again. And Jesus lived it perfectly. He loved the sinner perfectly. He loved the unlovable perfectly. He did what we could not do. And then he went to a cross, and on that cross, as he's bleeding and dying, he's taking upon himself the wrath of God that is meant for the one who is a murderer. He takes upon himself the wrath, not because he deserved it, but because God has set up a system that says sin must be dealt with. And God himself came up with the way that sin was to be dealt with. And then Jesus, God's Son, took that penalty. God's Son took the penalty. There's really one message that sticks in my heart and mind. One sermon, I guess. And that message is, I'm guilty, and you're guilty, and Jesus paid for our guilt, and that's why we worship him. That's it. Jesus paid the price for our sin, and that's why we draw near to him, and that's why we worship him. So my intent today was to get through 10 verses, and I didn't make it. It is 6:31. So tomorrow we're going to deal with lust. This week, today it was the anger, it's murder. I hope you got something from that. But tomorrow we'll talk about lust. We'll just pick it up where we took off. We'll just keep on going. I'll be here bright and early here in San Diego time. But jump back in. We're going 6 to 6:30 on every day, Monday through Saturday so far. But we'll get there even a little bit further. We're going to pick up, I think lust is a relevant topic and an uncomfortable subject, but we're going to get there. So thank you guys for jumping on with me, for leaving comments, for interacting with each other. Just be praying that God gives me wisdom. The Bible tells me that God will grant wisdom liberally as we ask. That's all we got to do. So I appreciate you guys. There's some comments coming in that I got to read on YouTube real quick. But set your alarm if you've got to. 6 to 6:30 tomorrow. Relevant topic, talking about lust. See you guys. And then I'm going to read YouTube here. I'm going to hit that button. I got to read this. Dun, dun, dun. Retracted message, Chica. I don't know what it is. Good. That was fast. I know, right? What's the soundtrack to my workout? I know, man. Andy, I got to get up some more songs. I've been thinking about that. I need to get on that. All right, Decky, thanks for jumping in with us today, man. All right, we'll see you guys tomorrow.